We have this problem in the world today where nobody trusts the media, right? And this is a larger than the world of comics thing. This is just in general. People trust one half of the media or the other half of the media. There is no one solid source of truth and all that kind of stuff. I'm not here to talk politics. I'm here to talk comics journalism, although it definitely has echoes of real-world journalism in it as well. The difference being, well, I would say the difference is that there's no money in comics, so there's no money in comics journalism. So what do you really expect from comics journalism? Because who's going to do all the work you need to do to properly report on stories? When there's no time for that, you're competing with a dozen other sites and all the social media and all that kind of stuff to try to get your story out first, right? You're trying to repeat the same thing that everyone else has reported. Although really, at this point, most reporting is repeating. And we'll get to that in a second. But there is definitely a lack of research and vision that goes into most reporting. Not all reporting, but definitely most. You'll see a story come out, and someone will actually do the work and do the research. Often it comes from a site that's outside the comics community. See, for example, any of the Neil Gaiman stories from the last year. And then once that story is out, then every comic book news source, quote unquote, which are actually pop culture news sources, but that's another story, will repeat the same two paragraphs from that original piece of reporting over and over and over again without adding anything new to it whatsoever. And again, understandable. There's no money in this. I don't know what we expect. There was a recent example of this that really made me shake my head, and it finally came true. The story from Rob Liefeld in his Robservations podcast where he talked about why he was leaving Marvel and going to be focusing on his own stuff for what he thinks might be the last 5 years of his career. And for some reason, I read all the reporting, I read all the comments from people who were getting it secondhand. They all seem to focus on the same thing. Rob got snubbed at the movie premiere. They wouldn't invite him to the party afterwards, so he's pissed and he's not going to be at Marvel anymore. Which is not being able to see the forest from the trees, which just goes to prove that everyone who reported on this story or repeated on this story didn't listen to the podcast. Doesn't listen to the Robservations podcast as a whole, because you can sort of see this story building over the course of the last year. By the time that podcast came out, there were a lot of holes in stories that Liefeld had clearly left open over the past year that he filled in with that last podcast. And showed the other side of things. And it was, kind of eye-opening in many ways. But if you listen to that podcast and the point you got out of it was that Rob Liefeld was angry because they deleted a picture of his family from the official photographer's camera, and so now he's leaving Marvel, you must have failed the SATs on the English comp section. I think they have that in the SATs now. I don't know. My daughter does it next year, so I'll let you know when we get there. But obviously you have no reading comprehension. You can't read to understand. Or you didn't listen past the 5-minute section of the podcast you chose to report on. Or you were just trying to find the most clickbaity portion you could. Or you have a thing against Rob Liefeld, which so many on the internet do for various reasons. And so you wanted to find the way that made him look the worst way possible, rather than actually reporting the news story. Not even a both sides thing. I understand you're not going to be able to go to Marvel and ask for comment. You're never going to be able to track down a movie industry executive and ask them what happened on the red carpet that day. But that's neither here nor there. That's such a small part of the overall story. It's intellectually dishonest to report it that way. And that's how it got reported all across the internet, especially across, social media where people are small-minded to begin with. If you listen to the whole thing, there's a whole second half of the story that is the kind of thing you think people would get behind Rob Liefeld about. And that is at the beginning when he talked about wanting to get his name up front in the credits of the movie as the creator of Deadpool. Much in the same way Siegel and Schuster got their names in the credits, in the opening credits of the Superman movie. And how this whole thing started, this whole chain of events, all these dominoes falling, started because of the disrespect he felt over not getting an answer on this and not being given this one thing he was looking for, which, to be honest, is not beyond the pale of things to ask for. Now, there are a number of reasons I can understand why this might not happen. Siegel and Schuster was a special case. There was a big public thing. I think Neil Adams may have led the cause at that point to get their names up there. Siegel and Schuster were not living very well, and so there's a big move on to make sure they were better taken care of. It would be less embarrassing to Warner Brothers when the movie came out, all that kind of stuff that isn't necessarily happening here. We also live in a world 40 years after that, or almost 50 years after that now, where we're better acquainted with what the law is, what the rules are, the trademarks, the copyrights, all that kind of stuff, and how these characters, these stories, these situations are owned by Marvel. They were created by Marvel in a legal sense. I think that's even in the contract somewhere. When you sign for your paycheck, you're signing over all rights to Marvel, including the rights to the stories, the characters, the likenesses, all that kind of stuff. Technically, you as the creator of work for hire don't own squat. Now, Rob Liefeld comes from a different generation where he got in pretty good at a good time, where he has a certain amount of, you can't say ownership, but he gets a certain royalty for every time Deadpool is used, because those are the contracts that were available and that he smartly signed back in 1989, 1990, whenever that was exactly. And in fact, my favorite part of this whole story, I'm not sure if it was in that podcast or the podcast before, but again, I wouldn't expect the journalists to pick up on this because they're repeating, not reporting. There's a great story in there about, or not even a story, it was an offhanded mention about how Marvel had asked him to buy him out. They wanted to, stop paying him every time they used Deadpool, and they just wanted to give him, I guess, a lump sum of money up front to sign off on that and be done with it, and he refused. So as pissed off as Marvel may be at Rob Liefeld, the Marvel Entertainment, the movie theater people, the movie production folks, the Hollywood side of things, not the comic book side of things, where by all reports, things are okay there. The creators, the editors, those folks are okay. The legal people are a separate question. That's always a thorn in the side of every creator. Just the funny part is now, Marvel has to deal with Rob Liefeld from here on out, till his dying day, and then maybe some. Who knows? I don't know what the contract is exactly, but they will be continuing to pay a guy they want nothing to do with. And that's kind of cool, given the fact that, they don't want to give him any credit, or the credit he thinks he deserves up in the front of the movie. Now, I've been thinking about this too, and this is where I wish someone should ask John August about this over on the Script Notes podcast. He probably has a good answer for this. There are certain rules, especially when it comes to the WGA, the Writers Guild Association, the Writers Union, the Actors Union, the Screen, whatever, all those unions Hollywood has. They have certain rules in place for who gets credit at the top of the movie, under what title, under what name, under what credit they would get, whether it's in the front of the movie or at the end of the movie. There's very specific rules for story by, screenplay by, written by, etc., etc. I'm not sure if the created by credit is covered in that anywhere, or if that's a side thing that's controlled strictly by the movie company or by the producers. Can exceptions be made? I don't know all those machinations. Someone else from Hollywood would have to speak to that more than I could at this point. I do wonder if that's part of the reason why they didn't want to put his name up in the front. Maybe why there was a special exception made for Siegel and Schuster back in the day. And I haven't gone to all the different movies based on comic books to try to figure out who's gotten what over the years. I'm not a comic book journalist in that way. I'm not going to do that research. Again, there's no money in it. Why bother? But I do wonder sometimes if there is a technical reason behind all that. There might be. But the point of this whole podcast, I guess this is a podcast at this point, Pipeline Podcast, episode 102. Thanks for listening. Now available at youtube.com. The point is, the journalism is flat out lazy as it fits to this story. And one person got it right, and that's the entire reason I'm bringing this up. Rob Salkowitz over at ICV2 is the one person who actually did the homework and listened to the podcast and discusses the entire podcast over the course of his article that he wrote for ICV2. I'll put a link to it down below in the show notes and whatnot. He makes pretty much the same point I'm making here right now, and that is there's more to this than being quote-unquote snubbed at the red carpet. That's all I really wanted to get out there. It's a little annoying that people are on this single-minded track when it comes to Rob Liefeld, that they fail to notice the larger story, and they fail to notice sort of a creator's rights argument being had here, or a pro-creator story going on that's being completely missed out. It's a story that, if it were anyone else, if it were Walter Simonson, for example, or Mike Mignola or somebody like that, and it's probably not the greatest example there because he owns Hellboy, so his name would go up at the front, that's fine. Pick some single creator that everyone loves and adores. I'm not sure there is any of those anymore, but just imagine there was one that everyone wanted to see the best of, or see the best for, and the same story came out about trying to get credit at the top of a movie and not getting it. This is actually a creator rights issue, not a snubbed at the red carpet issue. This is about a man who just wanted to try to make this happen. It would be good not just for him, but it would help set a precedent for other creators. Even, yes, the ones who signed away their rights to Marvel or DC in a work-for-hire situation, but these things can all be negotiated, right? And here's somebody who actually took the steps to try to negotiate for it. Didn't take anybody to court. Didn't do a whole public thing, try to get people to sign a petition or anything like that. Just wrote an email. Asked some questions, asked some people what could be done and how this could work and what he wanted, and got nothing back for it. It is kind of rude. Sure, I know they have 5,000 things going on, but at least the response would have been nice. And again, if there's a technical reason why it can't be, if there's some union rules that would unfortunately trample over, then maybe it's not worth doing for them. I don't know, but we don't have the answer for that. Hopefully someday someone can work that out for me. That's all I really wanted to talk about today. Just journalism in general is going south, and comics journalism, if ever there was much of one, is going south along with it for many of the same reasons, and it's a shame. And I hope people, after listening to this, maybe go back and even listen to that episode of the Robservations podcast and realize there's more going on than what you saw reported and then what you saw spread across social media for about 24 hours before everyone dropped it and forgot about it and moved on to the next thing. There's actually a good creator rights story there, a creator credit story there that deserves a hearing. And I'm sorry we missed out on all that. If you have any comments, questions, criticisms, complaints, leave a comment below. Find me on X at Pipeline Comics. Find me on BlueSky at AugieDB. I'll be in all those good places. Let's talk about it there and see what we can learn from each other. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.